Hi, everyone. Thank you for being so patient. Today is our first day for the course. It's for our digital forensic process, and we're going to be reviewing the fundamentals of digital forensics. Digital forensics follows a specific process. There are 6 steps, and it's super important that you understand each step and you're not skipping and you're not cutting any corners because any step where you misstep could result in the case failing or getting thrown out. So let's begin. So the first thing that we're going to be doing is looking at the process. We have identification, preservation, collection, examination, analysis, and presentation. Identification is just simply identifying what can and cannot be collected for evidence in terms of your investigation. Your preservation is how are you going to preserve that evidence? Are you going to remove the server from the network? Are you going to power it down? Are you going to? There's so many different things that you should understand when preserving data, and essentially understanding the volatility of that data or that evidence before taking steps in preservation. The next is collection. So once you've identified and you've preserved, the next step is to collect that data or acquire the data. Um, Examination, of course, is just examining the integrity, making sure that everything is good, making sure that you verify that it is exactly a bit by bit copy and or logical copies of that evidence that you're supposed to be analyzing. And then the fifth step is the analysis. Analysis is probably going to be your favorite part. Analysis is the usage of tools in order to extract and um, review complete data analysis in order to come to a conclusion. And then presentation will probably be the least favorite of those steps because that is how you're going to be articulating the data that you found in a way that you can present your theories, you can present your findings, etc. And it all comes into a forensic report used to um, to present what you've found or what you have not found. So let's dive in. Identification. Um, when two objects come into contact, they leave a trace on each other. So these traces that are exchanged from the basis of what is themed trace evidence. For example, if an individual browses a website, that web server or web application firewall may record their IP address within a collection log. The website may also drop a cookie onto the laptop. Evidence exchange in this matter may be temporary, and in our ability to observe it may be limited to the tools and knowledge we currently have. Temporary would mean that there might be log retention issues, log rollover issues that we might not be aware of. So it's extremely important to be able to identify what type of evidence is available and make a plan to preserve it. So trace evidence principle is guide the identification of potential sources of evidence during an incident. For example, if you're attempting to determine the root cause of a malware infection on a system, you will start by analyzing the infected system. As some malware requires access to a command and control server or C2, you should probably check the firewall connection or proxy logs for any outbound traffic from the infected system to an external IP address. This can help reveal more information regarding the malware variant as well. And of course, verify it before trusting it. Threat actors can easily manipulate digital evidence, so reliance on a single piece of evidence without other corroborating evidence should always be treated with caution. One example would be if a threat actor would place a type of Windows binary on a computer that has been modified in a way that is malicious, but it looks and acts the same as the original binary, One way that a threat actor can manipulate digital evidence would be to change the timestamps of um, that binary, meaning that it looks like it's part of the Windows operating system and that it was created and managed at the same time as the operating system and other binaries. That's called time stomping. And it can be done pretty easily by script. So sometimes the tools that we might have may highlight those types of manipulation of digital evidence. However, it is extremely hard to do a double time stomping, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But that's something that you have to keep in mind when you're doing analysis of evidence and making sure that you have a way to verify the evidence and its integrity. When we're starting with digital forensics, it's crucial to be able to start on the right foot. There are incident summary checklists, incident detection checklists, system details, network details, and malware details. The initial facts about an event are all an investigation has to get started. So it's a good idea to get them right. So it's important to gather additional information about those facts so you can establish context. So the incident summary would be the who, what, when, where, and how. Um, so just keep in mind that these are not all inclusive. You might need to add, remove, or change items to make the checklist more appropriate for organization and usage, but I will be providing those as a resource. The purpose of these checklists is to record high-level information about the incident and get a better sense of what has happened. It should also help you identify other sources of evidence. One of the checklists that I personally use is the incident detection. So this is to gather how details about how the incident was detected. Was it an IT person logging in remotely, all of a sudden can't? Was it a user that suddenly can't access their share files? Was it um, was it an antivirus with a pop-up with an attempt of lateral movement, depending on what type of security solution they might have, etc. It kind of gives you a good idea of which way to go. System details, gather information about every system that's involved. Understand the operating system, as well as the type of system, the purpose of the system, because you're going to have domain controllers, file shares, you're going to have SQL databases, you're going to have virtual versus physical, you're going to have VMware versus Citrix versus Hyper-V, level ones, level twos. They all act differently, they all see differently, and they all have different types of evidence that can be accessible and available to you. And of course, network details is super important too, because you want to know how everything is connected together. If you know that a client has a bunch of users that are working remotely, well, how are they accessing the systems? Are they using RDP, remote desktop protocol? Are you using a VPN, virtual private network? Are you using multi-factor authentication to get access to those? Are they accessing sensitive data on the file shares? Where are they storing all of that information? Those are super important details to know, because then you'll be able to understand some of the steps that the threat actor might have taken in order to gain access and get access to that sensitive information. And of course, if applicable, malware details. What are you dealing with? What variant are you dealing with? Are you dealing with, a brand new malware? Or are you dealing with something that has been out there in the wild for a while? Is it a ransomware malware? Is it just malware that, it isn't quite as self-propagating as the other ones? Does it require manual propagation? Those are some pretty key details for you to be able to move forward within your investigation and determine what evidence should be gathered here. Preservation, so safeguard from modification or deletion. Once evidence has been identified, it's important to safeguard it from modification or deletion. For evidence such as log files, it may become necessary to enable controls that protect log files from removal or modifications. For host systems such as desktops or laptops, you should isolate those systems from the rest of the network through either physical or logical controls, network access controls, or perimeter controls. It is critical that users are not um, allowed to access a suspected system. And for virtual systems, now more a modern way of doing business, snapshotting those systems can aid in the preservation, or even just copying the VMDK files. The reason why preservation is also super important is because sometimes you have systems um, that have limitations in log preservation. So they either have, for example, a system might have configured 2 megabytes of Windows event logs configured. And if additional events occur, well, the larger ones, or sorry, the older ones might get rolled over. So you're going to lose some evidence. So it's very important to be able to do that preservation as soon as possible. Collection. Critical process is acquiring the evidence. This is where examiners will begin to acquire the digital evidence. It's important to understand the volatility and the volatile nature of some of the evidence an examiner might want to look at. Volatile evidence is evidence that can be listed when can be lost when a system is powered down. So that would be RAM. For network equipment, this could include active connections or log data that is stored on the device. For laptops and desktops, that would include running memory or the ARP cache, so the address resolution protocol. According to the RFC 3227, the following is based on the guidelines of evidence collection and archiving outlined by the Internet Engineering Task Force that addresses the order of volatility of digital evidence. It's imperative that a digital forensic examiner take this volatility into account when starting the process of evidence collection. Methods should be employed whereby volatile evidence is collected and moved to non-volatile mediums, for example, an external hard drive. You have registers and cache, routing tables, ARP cache, process table, kernel stats, and RAM, temp file systems, disk, remote logging, monitoring data, physical configurations, network topology in archival media. We're going to go through these a little later on, one by one during our labs, but that's pretty much the list. And then proper evidence handling. Actions taken by examiners should not alter the original evidence. The evidence will become tainted and will result to being excluded from being admitted to a criminal or civil proceed. Some tasks have the potential to alter some of the evidence, so we have to incorporate proper documentation and have justifiable reasons. One example would be mobile devices. Sometimes mobile devices is extremely difficult to acquire evidence. Sometimes you have to go to extreme lengths to acquire evidence. Some mobiles have such strict security restrictions, both physically and in software, such as an iPhone, um, would require you to either do chip off or would require you to do manual investigations. Any of those could have the potential of altering the evidence. There are some mobiles that are of Android that require you, in order um, to jailbreak the phone, which would then alter the phone but allow you to bypass the pins, the face, the thumbprint, and the pin type of security on there. But again, that would alter some of the evidence. I don't suggest ever doing that without permission. And if you do have permission to go about doing that sort of forensic work, you require permission. And if you have that permission, you need to do the proper documentation. Every step of the way, everything that you're doing needs to be properly documented, so that if anyone comes over to you and says, hey, you might have altered or manipulated this data, you can look at your notes and say, no, I did exactly what I needed to do in order to complete the investigation. If you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. Documentation, every action that is taken should be documented in one way or another. This includes detailed notes and diagrams. Another way to document is through photographs. So if you're going and executing a search warrant, and you see a laptop or a desktop that still has a screen turned on, you are, depending on the type of search warrant, depending on your jurisdict's laws, this can be different everywhere in different states. But in Canada, if you have a specific search warrant and you have a screen that's turned on, it's logged in, you see browsers on the screen, you are allowed to scroll through it, clicking in the tabs, not clicking anything else, not changing anything else, and taking pictures. Proper documentation allows examiners to reconstruct the chain of events if ever the integrity of evidence is called into question. Chain of custody. There are two methods. One of them is electronically, the other one is paper and pen. There are pros and cons to each of them, but it's super important to be able to understand the chain of custody. It describes the documentation of pieces of evidence through its life cycle. So this life cycle begins when an individual first takes custody of the piece of evidence to when the incident is finally disposed of and the evidence can either be returned or destroyed. Um, so one of the things I'll get you to think about is what are the pros and what are the cons of each method. The examination. So details specific tools and techniques that are utilized to discover and extract data from the evidence. In a case where malware is suspected of infecting a desktop system as part of the larger attack, the extraction of specific information from an acquired memory image would take part at this stage. Digital forensic examiners may need to extract, for example, secure shell traffic from network capture. The examination of digital evidence also continues the process of proper preservation, in that examiners maintain the utmost care with the evidence during the examination. Once the examiner has extracted potential relevant pieces of data, the digital forensic examiner then analyzes that data in light of any other relevant data obtained. If forensic analysts have discovered that a compromised host has an open connection to an external IP address, they would then correlate that information with an analyst of a packet and with an analysis of a packet capture taken from the network. So using the IP address as a starting point, the analyst would be able to isolate that particular traffic. So this would be data isolation. For example, if a workstation within the environment gets infected and it is analyzed, and the very first indication of compromise is, let's say, July 5th. Through the analysis, you can say, oh, well, they accessed on July 5th when the computer or the workstation was infected, the user did these three activities. One of the activities was grabbing a was downloading an attachment from a coworker's email. Well, then you're going to look at the email traffic, and you're also going to look at that coworker as well. Where did that attachment come from? How did it get past your firewalls? Why was it able to be sent to that colleague? So you're going to look at the user. You're going to look at what was the user doing on July 5th. Well, the user on July 3rd went to a malicious website and downloaded something malicious. And it's a self-propagating thing. You do the analysis and boom, it's being attached to that colleague's email list and being sent out everywhere. So that's something that you need to keep in mind when you're doing analysis, is not having that tunnel vision, but also not doing the shiny thing. Presentation. Report has to be clear, concise, and unbiased facts. A forensic examiner will require to prepare a detailed written report that addresses every action and captures the critical data required. This report should be thorough and accurate and without opinion or bias. Nothing that says, I think, my opinion, well, in my experience, none of that. It needs to be very unbiased. It needs to prove facts. It could also be made of part of a larger incident investigation, and it can aid in determining the root cause of a full incident. So there you have it. Those are the fundamentals, the very basics, the beginnings, the layout of digital forensics. You have identification, preservation, collection, examination, analysis, and presentation. I hope this was fun and educational for everybody. We're going to have a lot more of these videos and a lot more content for you. Of course, we're going to start from the bottom, right? So I did talk a lot. Feel free to ask me any questions going forward, but I'm hoping that next week we can get into some of the more hands-on in starting with the identification and the preservation labs to go through. And then eventually we'll get into the examination and the analysis. But of course, as we're going through all of those steps, I'm going to be showing you how to do the presentation as we go through, because the last thing you want to do is do the presentation at the end of everything and you've forgotten key things, or you have to go back and review and it takes a little bit longer. So one of my tricks is to start it from the start, from the very beginning. As soon as you get an incident, do that legwork, create that layout, and then start with the detailed information that you're going to be gathering during the identification process.